Welcome. I'm Dr. Paul VanValin. I am the president and founder of Eden Counseling and Eden Leaders Institute. We've been doing these webinars now for over a year and a half, and there are a number of them online. I'll mention some of those at the end. I actually am getting to the point where I'm referencing our old training as we go through current content. Becky and I have been co-leading for over 30 years, the last 21 here at Eden. But we've been engaged in many activities, and I'm excited about what we're talking about today. Eden Leaders Institute exists for this kind of thing, to help equip leaders to live lives that are different than other people and create institutions that are different than what other institutions are. And we're going to be referencing some resources to assist as we move through here. Today's topic, dealing with this concept of power couples. Mirabella, my communication specialist in Brasov, and I were talking about a title, and she referenced power couples, and I hadn't really paid attention to that term, so we're going to look at that. People who have influence, and I believe that you'll be able to identify in your own lives characteristics that maybe are great and maybe need improvement. I believe that as a result of today's training, you will be able to prevent disasters in the marriage, at least, and be able to lead others. That's a big part of developing leaders, to lead other leaders in how to shore up their lives so that they remain real effective in their work and ministry. So I need to get this thing to move. Definition of power couples. From an online definition, couples consisting of two people who are each influential or successful in their own right. In other words, they could stand alone is how they're defining power couples, but you'll see many of them really function together, but they still fall into this category of power couples. We have couples in media and music. Now, this is kind of heavy on American culture. Some of these are internationally famous, so you'll recognize at least some of them, I'm sure, those of you in Romania. But Jay-Z and Beyonce, huge music industry personnel. Melinda and Bill Gates, leaders in technology. Bill has influenced culture around the world with his corporation and products, and Melinda has been leading philanthropically. They give, and they're running a giant philanthropic organization now, so they've had huge influence. Angelina Jolie and Brad Pitt, now they were stars in their individual lives, came together, and they have been influential in media, in philanthropy, and she was named a special ambassador in some fashion to the United Nations a while back, so they've had huge influence. In the world of fashion, Prada is a well-known name, and they are led by a couple, he the designer and she the business person. And so we're used to seeing these kind of names and faces in media. They become common because of their fame. And an up-and-coming couple who reside in Waco, Texas, are Chip and Joanna Gaines. And so any of you have been watching The Fixer Upper. Becky and I enjoy this program. I think we've watched all of them to date. I think they just finished their 4th season, so they've been doing this for 4 years, the television program. And they are co-founders of several companies and co-stars of their television program, and they're very different. He is very entrepreneurial, very risk-taking. You know, he's willing to be out there, and if you watch their program, he's always cutting up, doing things that are outrageous. And she is more cautious. She's described as a young adult as being very quiet, somewhat reclusive. And she took a trip for an internship in Manhattan in the garment industry and fell in love with what she calls quirky designs. And so she's been shaped by her experiences. He has a business degree in marketing. They met after they completed college. And in the way they work, she is the artistic one. And so her designs are now they're being marketed in some store, Bed Bath & Beyond or something like that. And they express a Christian faith, and they homeschool 4 children. And I just recently read they have no television. So they're a unique couple, up and coming in the world of media and wealth. And anytime you get people to actually change their environment, you're influencing culture in some way. And I believe that the themes that have been present on their television program have affected the lives and homes of people, at least in America. I don't know if this kind of programming is available in Europe. But because it's a reality TV show and you get glimpses of all the characters in their lives, one can watch their program, and if you have a mind on the topic we're looking at, there are some lessons to be learned because they appear to be both financially successful, socially successful. Their marriage appears to be successful. And when I tried to do a little background reading looking for problems, the quick online search did not reveal scandal or false identities or anything. It appears to be that they're presenting their lives as they really are. And so, with that in mind, and thinking about this particular power couple and the principles that would apply to things we can teach, I believe they have a clear mission. And if you look at some background information, their mission was to improve the housing in Waco, Texas, one house at a time. That's how they started. And that's the nature of what they do, what they present on the TV show. That influences the community and the lives of the families who reside in these what become beautiful structures. They appear fully committed to the mission. They're all about this. They're probably bordering on workaholic, as most leaders are, given most people's standards. And so the way they bring balance is evident in the program, and we'll talk about that now. It appears that they have clear roles and boundaries. And when you watch these programs, she is the designer. He will sometimes act independently. On rare occasions, she asks him to tear it down. But sometimes when he acts independently, he has actually done something that she's real excited about. So for the most part, though, they are consulting. He's dealing with technical issues and problems in she design. And they appear to respect each other in those roles and respect each other as persons. They communicate frequently. So you watch them solve problems, you watch them navigate, negotiate, you watch them disagree, and there is always a positive attitude with a lot of respect in regards to the communication. It could be all staged, but as I was reading through content that's available, it doesn't appear to be. They face failure without condemnation. Sometimes they blow it. They'll have something will just blow up in their face or won't work out. If you read their background, they obviously haven't been successful in everything they tried. Early businesses, early attempts to flip housing didn't work out. They did not let that deter them. They moved forward. And they are developing influence. So power couples, if you're not influencing somebody, you're really not leading. They take time for each other. There was actually, I think they're doing some of this strategically. They made a point of showing them on a date during one of the programs. They just went for ice cream. They just laughed and giggled. And the program is full of I love you, and kisses and expressions of value, a lot of compliments, really, really high investment in maintaining direct expressions of love and care. Now, one of the things that I deal with leaders often is this issue of time. And there's not enough time for everything. And I experienced that myself. But taking time and thinking, how can we live our lives strategically so that everybody's involved? They model living on a farm, and everybody has chores, and everybody's pitching in. And with this no TV, and I would say in general, we have to watch social media and that sort of thing, media in general. Everything's group, everything's interactive. And so they show their kids working, playing, chores. They all have jobs. They help with the business. And my own kids did that. My own kids worked in the business when they were of appropriate age. And all through this is compliment, I love you, thank you for doing this. Correction is given very gently. They really present kind of an idyllic life if you were interested in homeschooling and everybody being together and living on a farm and all that kind of thing. So we get these lessons. In fact, I want to go back just for a minute. In terms of mission, one of the things that I'm always challenging people, as I was challenged myself by my own coach, who happens to be watching now, is your mission clear? And have you written it out? Is it understandable? Could anybody understand your mission statement by just looking at it? And then fully committed means that we're not going to deviate from our mission. We're not going to let a lot of other stuff come in and make things too complex, move away from our mission. It's taken me years to move in that direction because I tend to be a kind of a complex, let's do everything kind of person. And roles and boundaries are best defined. I put SOP in there to remind me to talk about standards of performance. That how do you know you're doing a good job? And so in an attempt to be authentic and actually make this work, I'm working on Eden's standards of performance, starting with the business manager. And then I'm going to do me so that as I look at succession, I actually have crafted what kind of person could do what I do. maybe not the way I do it, but take over. We're looking to simplify procedures so that someone else could take over. This is all part of being 62 years of age and trying to figure out what's next. So I just wanted to mention those things. The more you can formalize, even if you're married, the more you can formalize roles and procedures, the better off you are. During this presentation, I'm going to get kind of autobiographical. I'm going to show you generations of influence of leaders in my own family. And I'm going to talk about some of the pitfalls Becky and I have discovered. So we're going to try to be transparent and a little reality webinar here as we go through this thing. So this is a term I just made up, super couples, because the power couples that you see, I have no idea whether they are have a spiritual orientation, what their faith is, or how balanced their lives are. We only know them from media, including the Chip and Joanna Gaines couple. So let's talk about super couples who are in the top 10% in everything. And so Deuteronomy 5:16, which I'm going to look at later, refers to prospering in the land the Lord God is giving you. And so I don't think you have to be a billionaire to be a super couple. I think whatever that God has put in your hand to influence, you can function at the top 10% relative to that situation. And so top 10% of what? And so these are the dimensions that I think one can craft goals that are understandable and measurable. Physical health. You can look at the BMI. You can look at blood tests. You can look at amount of exercise you're able to do, stamina, diet, and there are things you can look at am I living a life that really sets me apart as being someone different in a positive way? Mental health, the same thing. I tell all leaders, you have to learn to manage your anger, your anxieties, and your addictions. And if you can manage that, keep that stuff in place, you understand it, you know how to deal with it, you will not fall. You will keep moving forward in a constructive way. Everybody has, 60% of the population deal with depression at some time, various addictions. So to be at the top 10% doesn't mean you're free of all these things or temptation, but you're managing things well to sustain good mental health. And there are other trainings that we will address some of these things in, or we have in the past. Spirituality, do you have a faith that's meaningful? Is it fulfilling? Is it derived? Does it put you in community? Wealth, and this is really more related to debt management in America. Because whether you make $1 billion a year or 10,000, wealth is defined by your capacity to live moving forward. So, if you're saving 5%, it's a smaller amount if you're making 10,000. It's more if you're making $1 million, but you can still be working with a ratio that will sustain life. Marriage and family, unfortunately, many leaders crash and burn in either parenting or marriage. And we want to see things moving constructively for everyone. Emotional well-being is sort of consistent with mental health, but it's a little broader, and it has to do with feeling good about your life. And then social relationships. Do you have friends that are supportive? Do you have people that love you? And do you have influence? So a super couple has all these things functioning in measurable ways. They know they're in the top 10%, meaning if you grabbed 100 people from my community, I would ask myself, am I in the top 10%? And I'll be honest with you, I still have 5 pounds to lose to be in the top 10% in physical health. In other ways, I'm pretty good. Blood levels, stamina, energy, even sleep now is better. So these are things we have to work on. And one of the things that I'm absolutely convinced of, to be a super couple in the top 10%, you have to measure these things and you have to set goals, or you will drift back to average. And so the normal, you've heard me say this before, those of you that listen, the normal life in America is unacceptable. To be in the average zone is unacceptable. I think that's probably true in Romania as well, and in probably most of these areas. So when we're talking about super couples, we're not necessarily talking about the rich and famous. Although I know a few people who are, most of my world are not made up of the rich and famous. They're made up of leaders leading small groups, medium-sized groups, pretty good-sized groups. But this is what we're shooting for, top 10% in all these areas. So this is a top 10% family. This on the far, as you're looking at the screen, the far left is my mother. This is Joyce Marilyn Imhoff, graduating from Greenville College in Greenville, Illinois. Next to her is her sister, Jane Imhoff, who was a registered nurse at the time. Her father, John Clifton Daniel Imhoff, has somewhere between a 6th and 8th grade education. He was a custodian of a high school all of his life. He physically built at least one church. He's always been a leader in his community. And there's this amazing photo that my brother has of him as on the board of directors of Spring Arbor College, which is a small liberal arts university in Michigan. And they had a slot on the board of directors for someone who was connected to the college, but not necessarily a man of wealth. And so you have a picture of him, and he never wears a necktie. That's a faith thing. It's considered looking like you're above other people. So he's wearing a jacket and a buttoned-up collar just like that, standing next to the vice principal of Lincoln Mercury, vice president of Lincoln Mercury. So you got a guy that is worth millions and a guy that's worth tens, both on the board of directors. Just an amazing story. Next to him is my grandmother, and Clara was a very quiet person. She actually had a lot of anxiety. She was kind of reticent, quiet, but she was a leader in terms of character in her community. And they raised the young woman you see at the far right. She's actually a niece, but when her mother died giving childbirth, her father brought her to them and said, "I don't know what to do with her. Will you raise her?" And she has been my Aunt Elaine ever since. And so I show you this picture. I'm going to show you some more of this biographical stuff. These are the things that shaped me. Strong faith, strong commitment to family and community, willing to help, willing to sacrifice, and wise. My grandfather never had a lot of money. He was born in 1896, lived through the Depression. My mother was born during the Depression, has a big sweet tooth. He would tap. He got permission to tap neighboring maple trees, and he was never without sweets all of his life. Very inventive. He did all kinds of odd jobs. He could fix watches, did very meticulous work, mechanical genius. So they took what God had and they influenced their community and generations, as you'll see as we move forward here. So this is a wedding photo in the 50s, 1950s, and the bride is my mother. The groom, as you're looking at the picture on the left, is my father. His brothers and another gentleman are groomsmen. In this picture are 4 pastors, 4 educators, and 2 in the medical field. It represents a lot of leadership from the time, and there's a lot of longevity. I'm going to get to this verse in a minute, that honor your father and mother, that your days may be long on the land that the Lord has given you, and you will prosper. And my clan lived to be their 90s regularly, and even breaking 100. My mother died at 71, and that was because of cancer. She was taken young, but I would say she lived long enough to have the kind of influence that God had planned for her to have. So these are people. They're not rich, they're not famous, but they were leaders in the land that God placed them in, and they did prosper. I threw this picture in just because it's kind of fun. This is that same couple on their honeymoon. And it's as much for the dress as anything else. If you look at him, he could actually wear that today if he chose to. I just thought that was funny. This is 1953, I think. And this is actually the land that he now resides in Michigan, where they were honeymooning at the time. So that's kind of funny. So they had kids, and we have another generation of potential leaders. As you look at the picture, the figure in the center is me, and back then in my high school years. As you're looking at the picture on my right is my younger brother, who stands 6'3". He has a daughter who stands 6'3" and a son who stands 6'6". They have the stature of leadership that I don't know how that all ran down his family. I'm just average. On the far left, as you look at the picture, is my sister. She is a music teacher, married a pastor, lives in a small community, has a lot of influence. And the youngster, Steve, was a very successful entrepreneur in the 80s, built his own company. He's been very successful. He now has muscular sclerosis, and his life is very different. He and his wife still minister very effectively in a local prison, even though he's in a wheelchair, and in their little church they have positions of leadership. So again, where God has placed you, for whatever reason, with whatever assets you've got, can we thrive and be super couples in the midst of all this? So I just wanted you to see some generational impact. This is the joining of 2 leadership families, very similar in origin to as we're looking at to our right, my father and mother. And both gentlemen are in garb because they participated in the graduation ceremony at Spring Arbor College, where My wife Becky and I had just graduated. We were engaged and going to be married in 3 months at the time of this picture. And so these couples are very similar. Both men are pastors of the same denomination. Both successfully built and developed their churches. They're married to teachers who influence in that way, and they represent very much from the 50s, 60s, and 70s a leadership couple in a church environment where the church gets 2 for 1. They get 2 leaders for the salary of one, and not much salary at all back then. I think the first year in Dearborn, Michigan in 1960, my father made $3,000. And that wasn't a lot of money back then. But they never were in debt. Neither of these two families were never in serious debt. My mother-in-law lives well on the combined pension and savings that they accumulated over the years. My father lives well on the same. And they passed on a heritage of a sober, serious life, sacrifice, take leadership, and be wise. And so I wanted you to see 3-generation pictures of what gets passed down if, there are a lot of ifs, but the story goes on. And so this is my mother several weeks before she died. It's not a very flattering photo of her. It was taken because she is at home dying of cancer at the time. And behind her are myself and my 3 sons. And they're still developing themselves. The son to my immediate left is my eldest son. He's out in LA, and he has big dreams. He wants to influence culture out there in LA. And he currently is writing for Relevant Magazine. He's having some great adventures, interviewing some very interesting people, and establishing himself. His wife is a leader in development in a company. So who knows where they'll be in 10 years? I don't know. But they do have the background and the support to become what God wants them to become if he wants them to be out in LA, which is very different than where he grew up. The young man behind my head, Jeremy, is going to be moved to Manhattan in December. He's an accountant with Ernst & Young, and he's been identified within the corporation as a developing leader, and he's still developing himself. So we'll see. Is New York where he's supposed to end up, or is that the next stepping stone for him? And young Matthew, the fellow with the cap on backwards, is studying to be a physician assistant, and he and his wife's a teacher, and they're residing in Tulsa. So we don't know where they're all going to end up, but they have the heritage, they have the capacity to develop themselves as God would have it if they choose to stay on that path. And then there's my wife, Becky, as well. So I wanted you to see 3 generations of individuals who were brought into the world, placed by God in certain places, and those that we have had to say goodbye to, they did well. I believe they stand before the Lord, and he is saying, "Well done, thou good and faithful servant." And that's where I want to end up too. So let's talk about co-leading. And this was, I was doing this last night, preparing this presentation. What happens is I think about these things for weeks, look up resources and so forth, plan on putting it together the week before, and that never happens. And so last night I'm putting this together, and just looking at these generations, I just was taken to this text, Deuteronomy 5:16. Honor your father and your mother, as the Lord your God has commanded you, so that you may live long, and that it may go well with you in the land the Lord your God is giving you. That just spoke to me along the lines of what we're talking about. It's an odd text to throw in here, but honor and failure to honor I think honor is huge in terms of success as a leading couple, and it is often some element of failure to honor that leads to horrible downfall, either economically, professionally, ministerially, or in some fashion. So I'm claiming that it starts with honor, and that honor would have to do with respect. If you look up a definition of honor, you'll see that one is respect, the other is fulfill agreements, and the other is an act of honoring somebody. So respect and fulfilling agreements is what I'm looking at here. So in terms of our own life, Becky and I were talking about this. What does a person have to do to move into this super couple kind of status and stay there? And one of the things I think that you have to be ever vigilant, you have to be ever aware, you have to study and develop habits. And I've got a couple resources to look at to help kind of stimulate thought in that direction at the end. I've always considered myself a student of life. I love learning new things. When that ends, I'll be dead. So I'm constantly taking in new information, asking myself, how does this apply, talking to people. I'm not a great socially adept person. I'm not the kind of person who's the life of the party, unless it's a business party and we're talking business or something like that. So the conversations I like to have to do with with either developing me or somebody else or something. I just love seeing things grow and develop. So constantly studying, reading, and I'm going to reference some TED Talks. If you're going to watch something on a tube, every now and then watch something that'll just shake you up a little bit. And you can't do this alone. My own story is, I've jokingly said my first book will be 300 Ways How Not to Do Almost Everything. And it's because I have learned many lessons by myself, not having either known how or had access to mentors at strategic times of my life. And so I'm real big on, hey, let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's learn how to do this right from the get-go. And you can only do that by being guided by someone who has walked down that path before. So everyone has to have wise counsel, coach / mentor. Hire it if you don't have it organically in your environment. And then back to, you're going to hear some repeats here because they really, really, really are important. So clear mission, clear vision. So what I'm talking about, both couples agree on this. They agree on the mission, they agree on the vision and the roles and boundaries. And they have expectations that are realistic. So you've mixed this together and you're defining what's going to be honorable behavior. Because if I know what the right thing to do is and do it, that's honorable. If things are not clear and I'm doing the best I can or I'm reacting to circumstances, I probably will not end up with what I would call a totally honorable kind of package. Expectations has to do with disappointments and discouragements that come in when expectations aren't met. And everybody who starts something, if you started your own ministry or business or family, it's always not as sweet as the vision was. Because God has implanted us a hunger for heaven, so we are always kind of going there by default. Okay, what does heaven on earth look like? Let's go for that. And then we get into the adventure of realizing what life is like. And so, again, good expectations can come from having mentors, having business plans, consulting, reading, taking in information. I started Eden Counseling because I love what I do. I wanted to do more of it. And I just was so discouraged that I didn't know anything about business. And my accountant recommended a book got by Gerber, and I read it, and it's the E-Myth Factor. E-Myth being that everybody thinks they're going to start their entrepreneurial activity and everything's going to be great. I read that book and said, okay, I get it. I've now had a life experience to read this book, get it, and glean from it. And so my coaching is always flavored by my own failures more than my successes. Let me repeat this. My coaching is affected more by my failures than my successes. Your worst stories are often your best stories. The life-changing stories that have been told to me is when someone has said to me, this is what happened to me and here's how God helped me through it. Those are the transformational kinds of things. So respect and trust. How do you earn trust? Trust is conditional. I don't trust everybody for everything. I trust people based on what they have proven they are able and willing to do. So you've heard me say this. I trust that Becky will be faithful, honest, hardworking, great host, great mother. I don't trust that she'll use the right tool for the right job. I don't trust her with vehicle maintenance. You've heard this before if you've heard me talk. It's conditional. And so we learn to trust people based on the conditions and circumstances. And then we have to strive to be that trustworthy person in order to keep trust in place. I can't make my wife do things. I can only control me. So forgiveness is important in every context, and it's interesting to interact with couples that won't confess, who their view of leadership is sort of like the 45th president of the United States, that you never acknowledge that you made a mistake. And there is sort of a mentality of leadership that does that, but I personally want to emulate an authentic kind of leadership, which means when you make a mistake, you acknowledge it, you seek forgiveness, you fix it. So to both confess and forgive, I think, is honorable. And then as you develop yourself, one of the things that keeps me learning new stuff is I am constantly mentoring younger people in my field and in other areas. So the whole coaching thing we've gotten into the last few years, I just love it as I help people develop, discover who they are and what they should become. And then at Eden, it's helping young people. So they challenge my thinking. Hey, this is the new research. This is, what do you think of this? And every now and then I really learn something that's pivotally important to something because some younger person has been bringing this to my attention. So I think, once you hit 50, 55, 60, you really need to be asking yourself, who am I impacting so that the wisdom God has given me is moving on to the next generation. I think power couples, super couples do this sort of thing. So let's talk a little bit about some of the problems that come up with couples who are in leadership. And you're going to see some redundancy as we kind of go back through what we think are necessary and what happens when they're not there. And so isolation, I always come back to, is probably number one. The choices I have made independent of my wife or us together, well-intentioned but misguided because of lack of input from others. Sometimes we're working on something we didn't know anybody that could help us, and other times it's just foolishness. So whatever has cost us time, money, heartache, has largely been the result of decisions made in relative isolation. Not always. Sometimes we're doing the best we can, and just life happens. But question I ask every leader, individually and as a couple, when we're either coaching, consulting, counseling, is who are the three people in your life that you are real with? They love you, they respect you, you can tell them anything, they will confront you, and you need three, and this comes from Ecclesiastes 4:9 through 12. And so I would reference that text. You can read through that, you'll see where I'm coming from. And you can go to previous training we've done that God sent the disciples out in twos. He did not send them out individually. The great historic leaders of the church always traveling in pairs, at least usually groups, and we are meant to fellowship. So this isolation thing, almost every leader, in fact I would say 100% of the leaders that have come to us and something has been really broken and it's of a moral nature, the marriage is really damaged, they've begun functioning in some facet of life in isolation. I'd never have told anybody about this. I wouldn't think to tell anybody about this. I wouldn't trust people with this information, all that kind of stuff. So you need those relationships that you can go to as a couple. And we have people, we sit down couple to couple and we talk about stuff. And it's very transparent. And if you knew about it, it would be embarrassing, unless you're one of my core to three strands. But you have to have that. So the other thing that we see a lot of is competition and envy. And at first blush, you may say, oh, no, we don't have that. But it creeps in. It creeps in conflicts. And again, I'll just tell you the truth. Becky and I have a lot of conflict over what are the financial priorities. We should invest in this. We should save that. We should spend this. We are not wealthy people, but even people with huge amounts of money, they got there because they're careful with their money, and so the same themes arise regardless of your income level or your output. So because she is intimately involved in both the counseling center and the coaching world that we have, we will disagree on method, we'll disagree on staffing, and that's where this is in order to get out of a competitive place. So first we're talking about competition. We're in a power struggle over stuff. That's where your consultants are so important. Hey, what do you think of this? And not that they tell you what to do. You still have to negotiate. You still have to work it out. But very often I will hear differently from someone else, something Becky has told me, and the same for her. Whereas if I were to say something just the way I would say it, it would throw us back into an old power struggle. But if we bring in this other wise person and they tell us the truth and we listen to that, and it certainly affects our conversation. The conversation is elevated to a better place. So finances, methods of meeting the mission, we're sold out to the mission, but we disagree about how to get there, very common. And then staffing. Who should do what? And very often staffing, when boundaries start getting crossed, we really guard boundaries with emotional, romantic stuff. We're real rigid with this stuff. But very often, someone they've gotten out of sorts. The leadership couple, too much conflict, too much disregard for each other. They're beginning to feel unloved, not valued. And then someone within the organization just, oh, wow, do I feel good with this person? And whether it actually crosses boundaries that lead to adultery or not, there's now a distraction. I'm getting my needs met over here. And that is always dangerous, super dangerous. So, and then they'll argue over boundaries with that staff person. So again, we have a council of advisors that don't tell us what to do, but we go to, we communicate and we negotiate and we address problems as fast as they come up. We forgive, and that's how we avoid competition. The envy part has to do is also really common in our organization. I own all the shares of Eden Counseling, and we did this strategically. So I have all the financial liability for the organization that has the most financial liability. Becky has a position of leadership, but not ownership. And I am the president, and she has a lesser role. So though I really believe that she should have influence, we have set up an organization where I am ultimately responsible, and that's strategic. That I believe that suits what we're doing. It actually protects her from certain liabilities. And I have just been more of a student of leadership all of my life than she has, as she's been developing leadership as a parent. I've been developing leadership in organizational and consultation and that sort of thing. But there are times when either of us might be envious of the other. I might be envious that she has had the freedom not to be burdened by the stuff that I'm burdened with. I may then begin complaining that she's not doing enough to help. This is how envy starts showing itself up in ways you might not be thinking about. She may resent time I spent with somebody on the team that she feels detracts from time with her, and envy starts coming in, leading to conflict, leading to issues of boundary and discussion, this sort of thing. So can you see how envy can start creeping in, and we're not really identifying it that way? Because envy is one of the deeds of the flesh. It will happen. It's listed there in Galatians 5. And so we have to watch falling into a competitive mode where we're vying for power, authority, leadership, or the limelight, the adulation, the praise, or we become envious in terms of either the influence or the time spent, that sort of thing. Now, something that runs down my family, and what I find, it could be just that leaders come to me that have these backgrounds, but a lot of the leaders I talk to come from a background of perfectionism, judgment, therefore critical environments, and they tend to carry that in themselves and bring into both the work environment and the home environment some element of perfectionist and judgment kind of stuff. The language of judgment, we have other teaching on this that I'll reference at the end if you want to expand this, if this strikes a bell for you. But the language that we use reflects this kind of judgmental kind of position. And there's a great teaching that I reference by Scott Schweffel where he looks at the good and bad aspects of normal personality. Really, really great teaching. So that's just something to be aware of. Am I communicating in language that is kind, non-judgmental? And this is where Becky and I really get into it frequently. We are both very expressive. We have developed an open, fairly transparent relationship. People say what they think and feel. And there probably is way more contempt expressed between the two of us than you would be happy with in your marriage. Now, is that good? No, not always. The transparency is good, the openness, the honesty. We have to have a lot of positive interaction to account for the negative expressions. We have to have a lot of, so she gets really for me a lot of positive verbal affirmation because sometimes she gets sarcasm or judgmental kinds of statements and vice versa. So it's a balance thing, and you have to figure out your balance to where you're able to speak the truth to each other in love. You're not withholding, but you're not overriding the communication and dealing too much on negative content. 20-to-1 ratio of positive and negative interaction. And so you have to be really strategic with when you get negative. But if you're in business or ministry together, you have to talk about problems too. So speaking truth with kindness, that's the key there. So criticism, we have to come back to again. This is a pivotal conversation for Becky and me was a number of years ago. We used to have weekly staff meetings, and then that evolved into weekly leadership meetings. But in these meetings, this is my perspective. I'm the one giving the talk, so you're going to get my perspective. I'm presenting, and I perceive Becky as interrupting, overruling, or confronting me in a manner that no one else would do, given our roles. And I would stop her. So from her perspective, she was trying to engage, and I was cutting her off, which she hates. I hate being disrespected. She hates being cut off. So we're creating these repetitive core situations that neither of us like. And so one day she said to me, I think you need to treat me just like you treat every other employee. And my quick comeback was, I think you need to treat me like a boss sometimes, just like I'm a regular boss. We both paused and we both looked at each other and we said, there's something here, isn't there? So we have that led to discussions about when is it okay for us to let our hair down and just be a married couple, and when is it necessary for me to play the role of president and for her to play the role of her role. And so some very, very useful conversations, and we were able to amend our behavior fairly permanently once we just actually really sat down, negotiated, talked about it. So this criticism thing, the sly things that are said, because we live together and work together. Frustration at home could come out at work or vice versa, unless we really are working on our self-awareness, our capacity to manage our anxieties and anger, and ability to navigate things. So deception. There's a difference between discernment and deception. A big, big, big difference. So I don't necessarily, particularly when we started the company, I didn't think it was. We had children in the home. I didn't think it was good for her to know about all my cares. So I did not use her as my primary consultant. So every now and then, though, something would happen, and she'd say, "Well, why didn't you tell me about that? Why didn't I know about that?" And as if I was trying to keep something from her. And so you have to. This is something you all have to negotiate in your own little world. What is the difference between discernment and deception? When am I hiding or saying things that are not quite true? I'm putting a positive spin on it. And when is it wise to withhold? And so I think honest communication is when, if Becky asks me a question, I say, I'm not going to talk about that. And I'll tell you why. We're not going to have this discussion now. And I'll tell you why. Now, she doesn't like that either, but it's at least honest. Here's why we can't talk about this now, at this moment, at this time, versus trying to fluff over something. So you can tell, I believe in honest, direct communication. I believe that adults are capable of handling that if we do it in a kind fashion and not judgmental, critical, or mean. Resentment, I think every leadership couple has to deal with this. I've made big mistakes in my leadership role. My role as father, my role as husband, my role as president, big mistakes. Now, you can work to forgive somebody, but every now and then you just have to do a resentment check. How am I feeling about that thing that happened a couple of years ago that we're still paying for now? That's part of our world. How am I feeling about that relationship that we lost because we hired a friend, it didn't work out, and they weren't able to reconcile this change in function? That's what happens if you're working in business and ministry. So we just do a resentment check, we confess, we forgive, and we have to have an attitude that God redeems all things, we can profit from all things. And so the mistakes I make, I think, are my best stories. As I said earlier, I really think that I've grown as a person by being willing to embrace my own responsibilities. And this is real important. It took me decades not to take on more responsibility than was mine and to carry false shame. I've gotten much better at that. I really don't carry near the shame and anxiety that I used to carry. But that's a learning process, and we need people to help us sort that out. I'm responsible for this, not this. This is not my responsibility. I'm not going to take the blame. I will take the blame here, and here's what I can do with that. And sometimes all you can do is be forgiven. Gossip and splitting. Splitting is actually a term from psychotherapy, where a person has two care providers and tells stories to one so that this person states negatively about the other. And kids do this, actually. Kids do splitting. I don't know whether we call it that, but kids will go to one parent and tell a story so this parent will agree, and then these two get in conflict because I wouldn't have let him do that. What are you doing? Well, this is what he said. Well, that's wrong. You should have talked to me. So splitting can occur with staff, and there have been times when both Becky and I have had to confront each other that, you know what, you're using this person as a support, and I need them to work with me and not have a negative opinion about me. So gossip, you sharing something or just by your actions inferring something, is creating a splitting scenario. It takes a certain amount of self-awareness and corporate awareness to see these things, but if you have a consultant, they'll see it like now. Like, here's what's going on. Okay, boom. You need to do this, this, and this. That's the value of that outside person who's not all clouded up with the emotions of what you're doing. So gossip can be just telling people things you shouldn't tell, so boundaries are being violated, or they can lead to splitting by sharing things like that. So again, good healthy boundaries, talking about what is okay to share, who gets let in on the inside, who we keep on the outside. Neglect, I'm talking about time here. So if you look at Becky and my our personalities, you'd say, how do they live together? Becky's primary love language is meaningful time. Meaningful time. Well, that takes time. You just can't give meaningful time in a few minutes. I'm a busy guy. So we have had to negotiate this a lot. And so we benefit best by scheduling in meaningful time and vacations and retreats. And so when we have a speaking engagement, I'm always looking for a few hours or a day to tack on. We go together, we get time for us. If we spend a half a day together, she's in a different mindset toward me. I'm a better person in her eyes. I'm the same guy. But if we spend a half a day together, I am a better person. Does that make sense? I mean, so if you understand each other, you have to make time for the love expression that meets the needs of each other. So we're able to say, in spite of the fact that we're struggling at work here, we're in a loving, committed relationship. And then there's, along the same lines as too much sacrifice. I come from a long line of duty-minded people. Meeting our obligations is very, very, very important. And so we will go the extra mile always. My father was rarely home in the evening because he could be in the home of working members or prospects of the church. He was an evangelist. He drew people in. My mother the same. They co-led, even though he was the pastor. She ran neighborhood Bible studies that built 50% of the church. I mean, they really did co-lead. And again, back then it was 2 for 1 in terms of the cost of the church. So you can sacrifice too much. My dad confessed to me. He and I went to Promise Keepers. I wanted to do that with him. Remember that back in the 80s? Took him to Promise Keepers, and he confessed, I've been too busy. I should have spent more time with you. That was a very meaningful conversation for me. That was very healing. I got to have the same one with my kids, I think, as we move forward. So you can give too much. So let's talk a little bit about resources. And one of the things I haven't been doing because I'm talking to you is looking to see whether we have any chat coming in. I don't see any. Let me remind you, we got about 14 minutes left. And during that time, if something is striking a note with you and you want me to elaborate or comment, or you just have something to add, that's okay as we do this. I mean, I welcome some kind of interaction. If you go to the chat spot of your little bar there, you can ask a question, make a comment. I don't have it open because I can't see my screen, but Mirabella will text me. It's right here, Mirabella. And so I forgot to mention that earlier. I do welcome interruption. I mean, I think that's part of relationship. So recommended reading. So Mirabella and I took a look at what was online, Amazon.com, and we only found one book. And that book is When Leaders Live Together by Larry and Debbie Titus. And so the other night I read it, or my version of it, of reading, went through the whole book, and there are some points there that they do really, really, really well. And I would recommend this book to couples who work in an environment that is fairly traditional. They work and live in an environment. In other words, head of the home is traditionally the husband, head of the church, typically a male, that kind of thing. They do a really good job of looking at headship versus leadership, acknowledging that sometimes the head doesn't have the greater leadership skills. And this is a huge conflict for couples in traditional environments. It's difficult sometimes for them to reconcile the leadership of the wife in a traditional environment. This is true in secular business, if those are the values and the interpretation of whether it's scripture or just the culture. And this is true in cultures. When I was in the Middle East, very clearly paternal culture. And yet women have great leadership skill, ability, and influence. And so this headship versus leadership, well done. Control versus release, well done. Many leaders in traditional environments these would be men, use their position as a means of getting their way. And that is not the same as effective leadership. They have communication, money, boundary support. These are topics I just noticed they do well. And so I would recommend this book to anybody, but particularly, I think sometimes we read things and you say, oh, I don't believe that. And that throws us off. But they have really good principles. And whether or not you are traditional in your view of gender roles, I think it's a good read. So that's one piece of this. I work with lots of people that are not traditional in gender roles. There's a whole lot of the world that actually rejects that. And so I got to push this. A Christian author that I really respect is Dr. Donald Joy. He's written many books. His books on boundaries are really, really good. In fact, he had the the most requested radio program. It used to be in cassette. So this is back in the 80s, 70s, and 80s when James Dobson had his radio show and he had speakers and you could request a cassette tape. And his presentation was the inherent differences between male and female. Highest requested ever. He's a really good communicator, great writer. And he's been a friend of my family for decades. So Two Become One, God's Blueprint for Couples. And I think he did this on purpose. He used language as if he was a traditionalist, because everybody uses God's blueprint, God's plan. But he argues for an egalitarian relationship, and he does it really, really well. He uses the language of co-regents. Now, it's not necessarily a book on leadership, as the other book was. But I think if you have or want an egalitarian approach, this is the book to read. Or if you just want to study why in the world do these people think this way, if you have a different view, which I think is also part of effective leadership, is to understand people different from us. A great read, and it is very biblically. I mean, he runs a biblical argument as to why, if you have, and actually he's pretty judgmental about traditional roles. So to take that a little tongue in cheek, but he says that to promote that a husband must be the head is actually to be still under the curse, and so he talks about co-regency, and that as a result of the curse, God said to the woman, "Your desire will be for your husband; he will rule over you." And that so that Don argues really well that in salvation, the curse is lifted. So research shows. So then again, I fall back on my psychology part. Research shows that egalitarian and traditional marriages can be perfectly happy, perfectly effective, perfectly successful. But all the factors that we're talking about, though, have to be there so that you have a successful marriage, business, however you choose to structure it. So those two resources I highly recommend, just to poke your interest, give some thoughtful thought to how we do business, how do we do it, how do we run it. And so I listed specifically here the training that I have done that, at least the first three bullets, that are expand upon the principles here. When I started the Good Shepherd series, the first two have to do with communication, conflict management, judgment, and then the personality pieces, 2 bullets down, personality differences, and embedded in there is Scott Schwefel's YouTube TED Talk on good and bad personality. He actually calls it personality in the brain. It's a really good training. And then the second bullet, we spent 4 months looking at premarital and marital counseling. And in the context of counseling, again, all the tools that I use in my own life, conflict management, negotiation, keeping romance alive, all that stuff is embedded there. So we have resources that you can just go and watch at your leisure out there in the cloud someplace. And just a little update as to what we offer here for those of you that might be interested. One of the fellows that I hired years ago, 5 years ago, was Tom Nolan. And so he was my coach. And so Tom is part of the Eden Leaders Institute coaching team, along with Bob Groves and Richard Kidd. And so there are people like us that exist to help promote the values that I'm espousing here. And again, you can't do it alone. I needed Tom and I worked really intensively for a year, and he had a huge impact on my life. Sometimes you just have to dig into your pocket and hire somebody. You are welcome to communicate with us anytime about anything. And I've got Mirabella's thing there. I mean, it's no problem at all to answer a question or suggest a resource or something like that. And we sometimes bring people here, and we go visit places. So when we go to Romania next, we've not gone for a year. We're not going this year. We're taking a hiatus so that I prepare written content to take. We're not going to come to Romania again until we have written content and we've thought through what we want to do so that it has really high impact for the leaders that we have a relationship with. So that's why we've delayed that. We're having trouble getting time to put some of the stuff in writing that I'm presenting in these workshops. But we have this training, and we offer the intensive. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. And I think that might be my last slide. Let me see here. It is. Yeah. Okay. So that's our program for today. Let me. Whoops. That didn't work. Let me just double check and make sure Okay, so we haven't had anybody check in with questions, which is awesome. You're going to get a survey. It's going to come to you, I think, real soon. Do fill it out for me, particularly that I'm interested in or I'd like more of. This topic came from surveys last month. When I saw this, I like that. Let's talk about that. There are some other ones that we'll get to that are also were suggested, but I want to thank you again for listening in and joining us. I hope it was an hour well spent. I hope you are, if you find it some motivation, the resources I've suggested, they'll be time really well spent. Um, I'm taking a week off next week. I'm really excited about that. We all need a break. That's going to be some of Becky's time and my time to just really dig into our relationship while we also take time to strategize and reflect. You need those times. So may God bless you this week. Have a great day. Have a great month. And we'll see you back in June. Take care. And you all are welcome who are saying thank you on the chat. Bye bye.